Hello, my name is Ethan, 22 years old. I'm a senior studying mechanical engineering, living in a small town called Willow Creek, nestled among sprawling wheat fields and smooth red dirt roads in the heart of America. Willow Creek isn't anything special. A few grocery stores, an old coffee shop with a faded sign, and a small church where everyone gathers every Sunday. But to me, this place is my entire world. Filled with childhood memories, the smell of freshly cut grass, and the gentle murmur of the small river flowing behind my grandfather's house. I love Willow Creek not just because it's my hometown, but because of my grandfather, the man I admire most in the world. My grandfather, Frank Sullivan, is a Vietnam War veteran, now nearing 80 but still as sturdy as an old oak tree. He lives alone in a small wooden house on the edge of town, where my grandmother used to tend a garden full of roses before she passed away 10 years ago. He's a man of few words, his weathered face etched with wrinkles like a map of his life, but his eyes burn brightly as if the fire within him has never gone out. I vividly remember those crystal-clear summer days when I was a 10-year-old kid running barefoot after him to the river to fish. He taught me how to tie bait, how to wait patiently, and told me stories that still make my heart race. Stories about the war, about the days he trudged through humid tropical jungles, about the comrades he saved and the moments he faced death. "You know, Ethan," he'd often say, his voice low but steady as a rock, "surviving isn't about luck, it's about will. You have to choose to live even when everything's against you." He was awarded a medal for pulling a wounded soldier out of the line of fire despite the danger. That's my grandfather. Tough, fair, and always putting others before himself. But not everyone sees his worth like I do. My father, James Sullivan, is his only son. Dad is the director of a real estate company in suburban Philadelphia, living in a big house with white picket fences and a perfectly manicured lawn. My mother, a gentle but busy accountant, often tries to keep the peace in the family. But ever since Dad got promoted 8 years ago, the relationship between him and Grandpa has grown increasingly distant. Dad calls Grandpa stubborn, old-fashioned, and says he doesn't understand the modern world. Grandpa, on the other hand, says nothing, quietly living his life in Willow Creek, chopping his own firewood, tending his garden, and driving his old Ford truck around town. I don't understand how Dad can be so distant from someone like Grandpa. To me, he's a symbol of strength, resilience, and unpretentious love. The days I spent with Grandpa are the most beautiful memories of my life. Every summer, I'd ride my bike 3 miles from my house to his. I still remember the smell of burning wood in his fireplace, the steady rhythm of his axe splitting logs, and the way he'd laugh heartily when I tried to mimic him swinging the axe but stumbled like a clown. "Take it easy, Ethan," he'd say, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Everything takes time. Keep at it, and you'll get good." He was never in a hurry, never impatient. Once he took me to the edge of the forest, showed me how to spot deer tracks, how to read the wind, and told me about the days he survived in the Vietnam jungle with just a knife and a little water. "You know," he said, his eyes gazing into the distance, "war taught me to appreciate the smallest things. A sip of clean water, a night without gunfire. You have to be grateful for what you have." I grew up seeing Grandpa as a hero. At nearly 80, he's still as strong as a young man. Every morning he wakes up at 5 a.m., jogs around the field, mows the lawn, fixes fences, and even climbs onto the roof to patch leaks himself. Once I saw him lift a log as big as my entire body without so much as a grimace. "Grandpa, how are you so strong?" I asked, wide-eyed. He just smiled, his wrinkled face beaming with pride. "The body's a machine, Ethan. If you take care of it, it won't betray you. But what I love most about him isn't his physical strength. It's the way he lives, fairly, honestly, and always ready to help others." Once a neighbor's car broke down in the middle of the road during a downpour. Grandpa didn't hesitate to brave the rain, drive out to tow the car back, and fix it for free in his shed. "No one should be left alone," he told me afterward, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Yet deep down, I know Grandpa is lonely. Since Grandma passed, he's lived alone in a house full of memories. Every time I visit, I see him sitting in his old armchair, staring out the window, holding an old photo of her. He never talks about his sadness, but I can feel it. Once I asked, "Do you miss Grandma?" He just nodded, his voice hoarse. "Every day, Ethan. Every day." I didn't dare ask more, but from then on I tried to visit him more often, even though college keeps me busier than before. My parents' world is completely different. They live in a world of cocktail parties, luxury cars, and endless meetings. Whenever I visit home, Dad asks about my grades or future plans, but rarely mentions Grandpa. Once I tried saying, "Dad, why don't you visit Grandpa? He's doing great, still handling everything himself." Dad just shook his head, his voice cold. "He doesn't need anyone, Ethan. He likes living alone." I don't understand. How can he say that about the man who raised him, who sacrificed so much for our family? I started to see the difference between Dad and Grandpa. Dad lives for recognition, for praise from partners and friends. Grandpa lives for the simple things: a peaceful morning, a stack of freshly chopped wood, or a story shared with his grandson. I don't want to become like Dad, but I don't dare confront him either. I just want to keep Grandpa in my life, like a guiding light for the days I feel lost. That winter, as I was diving into final exams, a call from Grandpa changed everything. I was in my dorm, buried in books, when my phone buzzed. His voice came through as deep and steady as ever, but there was something different, a rare excitement I seldom heard. "Ethan," he said, "I've got something to tell you. But not over the phone. Can you come to my place this weekend?" I was surprised. Grandpa rarely called midweek, let alone sounded so eager. "What's up, Grandpa?" I asked, trying to curb my curiosity. He just chuckled, his voice full of mystery. "You'll see when you get here. Brace yourself, it's a big gift." Then he hung up, leaving me with a head full of questions. All that week I couldn't focus. My mind raced with possibilities. Had Grandpa found some old treasure in the shed, or was he about to share a secret from his war days? Whatever it was, I knew Grandpa never joked around. If he said it was a big gift, it had to be something extraordinary. I counted down the days, the hours, until the weekend arrived. I hopped on my old bike and pedaled 3 miles through roads blanketed with golden leaves, my heart pounding like a kid about to unwrap a Christmas present. When I arrived, Grandpa was standing on the porch wearing his familiar flannel shirt, holding a mug of coffee. In the soft golden light of the afternoon, he looked like a living statue, strong and unyielding. But when he turned to look at me, his smile carried a hint of fragility, as if he were holding a secret bigger than himself. "Come inside, Ethan," he said, his voice warm and deep. "I've got something to tell you, and trust me, you won't believe it." I stepped into the familiar wooden house, the scent of pine and coffee lingering in the air. On the dining table sat a small, intricately hand-carved wooden box, gleaming under the lamplight. I looked at him, my heart racing. "What's this, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. He sat down, motioning for me to sit across from him. His eyes shone, but there was something profound in them, as if he were looking back at an entire lifetime. "Ethan," he began, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time, and now I want you to be the first to know." I sat there, my heart pounding, my eyes locked on Grandpa. The small wooden box on the table seemed to glow with a strange light, as if it held a monumental secret. The air in the familiar wooden house suddenly felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Grandpa cleared his throat, his voice low and deliberate, carrying a strength that held my gaze. "Do you remember the stories I told you about Vietnam?" he asked, resting his hand lightly on the wooden box. I nodded, swallowing hard. How could I forget? The stories of sleepless nights in the jungle, of the times he and his comrades faced death, of the scars on his body, both physical and emotional, that I could only imagine through his words. "War doesn't just leave scars on the body, Ethan," he continued, his voice growing hoarse. It leaves things no one can see, things that eat away at you from the inside. I frowned, unsure where he was going with this. Grandpa usually spoke of the war with a sense of resolve, as if he'd made peace with his past. But today, something was different. He opened the wooden box and pulled out a stack of carefully folded papers, their edges yellowed with age. These are letters from the Veterans Administration, he said, placing the papers on the table. They just notified me. I won the lawsuit. About Agent Orange. I blinked, trying to process the information. Agent Orange. I'd heard of it. A toxic chemical used by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War, leaving devastating consequences for both American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians. Grandpa had mentioned how he and his comrades often marched through jungles sprayed with the chemical, unaware that it was seeping into their skin, their blood. But he'd never spoken much about its specific effects. He always sidestepped the topic as if mentioning it would reopen an unhealed wound. Won the lawsuit? I repeated, my voice shaky. What does that mean, Grandpa? He smiled, but it wasn't entirely a happy smile. It was a mix of relief and pain. It means they're finally recognizing what I and thousands of other veterans have been through. The illnesses, the sleepless nights, the times I felt my body betraying itself. He paused, looking out the window where the sunlight was fading over the fields. They're compensating me, Ethan. A large sum. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even $1 million. My jaw dropped, unable to believe my ears. $1 million? I nearly shouted, making him chuckle hoarsely. Are you serious? I've never joked about money, he said, his eyes twinkling. But honestly, I don't need it. I've lived my whole life without it, and I'm fine. He tapped the wooden box lightly, as if it were a treasure, not for its material value, but for its meaning. I've thought about this for a long time, and I've decided to give all of it to your father. I was stunned. To Dad? I asked, my voice faltering. It wasn't that I didn't want Dad to have anything, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. My father, the man living in a fancy house, driving a Mercedes, barely bothering to visit Grandpa, was now being given a fortune. Why, Grandpa? I blurted out, unable to hold back. Grandpa looked at me, his gaze softening as if he understood the turmoil in my heart. Ethan, I know what you think of your father. I know James hasn't always done the right thing. But he's my son, my flesh and blood. I promised your grandmother I'd do everything to give this family a better life. I couldn't give James what I wanted when he was young. Now I have this chance. I want him to live easier than I ever did. His words cut like a knife, sharp and painful. I wanted to argue, to say that Dad didn't deserve it, that he'd turned his back on Grandpa, but I couldn't. Not because I was afraid, but because of his eyes. They were the eyes of a father who, despite being hurt, never stopped loving his child. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I've prepared a special Christmas gift, he continued, his voice growing lighter. He pushed the wooden box toward me and opened its lid. Inside was a neatly folded check along with a handwritten letter. I carved this box myself. Took me a whole month, but I wanted it to be special. I'm going to bring it to James's house on Christmas Eve. I want to surprise him. I looked at the box, its intricate hand-carved patterns telling a story of patience and love. I pictured Grandpa sitting in his shed under dim light, painstakingly carving every detail, hoping to bring joy to the son who'd grown distant over the years. My heart ached. Do you think Dad will be happy? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandpa shrugged, his smile fading slightly. I don't know, Ethan, but I hope so. Sometimes a gift can change things. Maybe it'll make James see what he's been missing. I wanted to believe him, but deep down I had a bad feeling. My father wasn't someone who changed easily. I'd seen the way he looked at Grandpa, like he was a part of the past Dad wanted to forget. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled and took his hand. Can I come with you? I asked. He shook his head, his voice firm. No, Ethan. This is between me and your father. You've got exams to worry about. Focus on your studies. I'll drive there myself. I frowned. Drive? You're going to drive 15 hours to Philadelphia, alone, in the winter? I couldn't hide my concern. Grandpa was nearly 80. Strong as he was, driving cross-country in snowy weather was no small feat. He laughed, patting my shoulder. You think I'm too old to handle that Ford? I've driven through worse roads in far more dangerous situations. Don't worry, Ethan. I'll be fine. I wanted to protest, but his eyes silenced me. They were the eyes of a veteran who'd faced war and survived. I knew I couldn't convince him. Just be careful, okay? I said, my voice trembling. He nodded and stood up, gesturing for me to follow him outside. Come on, help me chop some firewood before you go. I need to keep this house warm when the snow comes. We went to the backyard, where a pile of logs awaited. The steady, powerful sound of his axe echoed like the heartbeat of a man who never gave up. I stood there, watching him, my heart full of conflicting emotions. I was proud of him, of his selflessness, but I was also afraid that Dad would hurt him again. I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me like the chill of the approaching winter. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa's gift. I imagined him standing at Dad's door, holding the wooden box, hoping to mend a relationship that had been broken for years. I pictured his smile as Dad opened the box, realizing the gift wasn't just money, but the heart of a father. But then I thought of Dad, the man always busy, always prioritizing status. Would he even understand the gift's meaning? As Christmas approached, I grew more restless. I called Grandpa every day, asking how he was preparing, if he needed any help. He just laughed, his voice as steady as ever. Everything's ready, Ethan. I'll head out early on the 24th. Don't worry, just focus on your own stuff. But I couldn't relax. Something inside me screamed that I had to do something. Finally, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Grandpa go alone. I would go to Philadelphia. Not to interfere, but to be there for him, whether he agreed or not. I didn't tell him, knowing he'd refuse. I quietly packed my things, bought a bus ticket, and planned to arrive at Dad's house on Christmas Eve. As I sat on the bus, watching snow-covered fields blur past the window, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa. I imagined him driving his old truck, alone on a 15-hour journey, carrying the wooden box and a dream of family. I prayed things would go as he hoped, but deep down I knew it wouldn't be that simple. I glanced at my watch. 3 p.m. Grandpa must have left at 4 a.m., as he'd said. I pictured him in the truck's cabin, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes focused on the snow-covered road. At 80, he still drove with the confidence of a young man, but I couldn't help worrying. Winter highways weren't meant for an elderly man, no matter how strong he was. I sent him a short text. Be careful, Grandpa. I love you. No reply. I knew he didn't like using his phone while driving, but the silence tightened my chest. The bus ride took all day, and by the time I arrived in suburban Philadelphia, night had fallen. Christmas lights twinkled on the streets and festive music drifted from houses. I took a taxi to my parents' neighborhood where I knew Grandpa would be. Their house sat in an upscale suburb with pristine white fences and sleek cars parked in driveways. I asked the driver to stop a few houses away, not wanting to be noticed. Stepping out, the bone-chilling cold made me shiver. I pulled my hoodie up and stood behind a large pine tree, my eyes fixed on the brightly lit house. From a distance, I spotted Grandpa's old Ford truck parked by the curb, right in front of Dad's gate. My heart raced. He was here. I checked my watch. Nearly 7 p.m. I imagined him driving 15 hours through biting winds and slippery roads, all to deliver that special gift to Dad. I saw his figure emerge from the truck, still tall but slightly stooped with age. He wore his old army coat, clutching the small wooden box he'd spent a month carving. Under the streetlight, he looked like a warrior from the past, carrying unshakable hope and resolve. I held my breath, standing still in the shadows, watching him climb the porch steps. Cheerful Christmas music spilled from the house, mixed with the sound of laughter and chatter. My parents were hosting their annual Christmas party, as always. I could picture the scene inside. Dad's wealthy friends, business partners with wine glasses in hand, and Mom, always striving to make everything perfect. I wondered if Grandpa knew about the party. He hadn't called ahead, true to his nature, always wanting to surprise, always believing genuine affection didn't need an announcement. He stood at the door, taking a deep breath. I saw his hand tighten around the box. He knocked 3 times, firm and deliberate. My heart seemed to stop. After a moment, the door opened and Dad appeared. He wore an expensive suit, his hair neatly combed, but his expression shifted the moment he saw Grandpa. From where I stood, I couldn't hear their words clearly, but I saw Dad frown, then shake his head. Grandpa said something, his voice low and steady, holding the wooden box out to him. But Dad didn't take it. Instead, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him as if he didn't want anyone inside to see. I crept closer, straining to hear. Dad's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp like a blade. "Go home, Dad. It's not a good time. You showed up unannounced, and I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my guests." I froze, my blood turning to ice. I looked at Grandpa, waiting for him to respond, maybe with a sharp retort, the way he'd faced every challenge. But he said nothing. He just stood there, silent, his shoulders slumping slightly. Under the streetlight, his face hardened, but his eyes, those eyes that always burned brightly, dimmed, as if the flame within him had been snuffed out. He turned and walked slowly back to his truck. The wooden box remained in his hands, unopened, unaccepted. I wanted to scream, to run to him, to storm into the house and confront Dad, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched Grandpa walk away, his figure shrinking in the light snowfall. When he reached the truck, he paused for a second, glancing back at the brightly lit house, then shook his head. He climbed in, started the engine, and the truck rolled away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, the freezing cold cutting through me, feeling like the world had just collapsed. I couldn't believe my father, the man I called Dad, could say such things to Grandpa. After everything he'd done, after 15 hours of driving, after a lifetime of sacrifice, all he got was a slammed door and a cruel dismissal. Rage surged within me, but with it came pain. Pain for Grandpa, the man who'd poured his heart into that gift, only to be rejected without mercy. I ran toward the house, no longer thinking. I pounded on the door, my hand aching from the force. Mom opened it, her face shocked to see me. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice worried. I didn't answer, pushing past her into the house. Inside, the party was in full swing, laughter and chatter echoing as if nothing had happened outside. I spotted Dad near the fireplace, holding a glass of wine, talking to a man in a suit. I marched over, my voice trembling with anger. "What did you just do to Grandpa?" I demanded, ignoring the stares from those around us. Dad turned, his face briefly flustered, but he quickly regained his composure. "Ethan, don't make a scene. I just told him it wasn't a good time. He showed up without warning." "Not a good time?" I nearly shouted. "He drove 15 hours to get here. He brought a gift you don't even know about because you didn't bother to look." I paused, fighting back tears. "Do you know what he was going to give you? $1 million. From the Agent Orange lawsuit, he wanted to give you every cent because he thought you deserved it." The room fell silent. Guests stopped talking, turning to stare at us. Dad stood frozen, his wine glass trembling in his hand. "What? Are you serious?" he muttered as if he couldn't believe his ears. "It's true," I said, my voice breaking. "But you slammed the door in his face. You sent him away. And I'll never forgive you for how heartlessly you treated him." I turned, unable to look at him any longer. I ran out, leaving behind the house filled with bright lights and fake laughter. I had to find Grandpa. I couldn't let him be alone, not after this. I ran down the street, snow clinging to my shoes, my breath forming white clouds in the air. I called Grandpa, but no one answered. I pictured him driving alone, the wooden box on the seat beside him, his heart shattered. I didn't know where he was going, but I knew I had to find him. I hailed a taxi, telling the driver to head in the direction Grandpa's truck had gone. I had no plan, no destination, only one thought. I had to be with Grandpa right now. The chill of Christmas Eve seeped through my coat, but I felt nothing except the storm of emotions raging inside me. I sat in the back of the taxi, eyes glued to the window, desperately searching for the familiar outline of Grandpa's old Ford truck amid the thickening snowfall. The driver, a middle-aged man with a deep voice, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Who are you looking for in such a hurry on a night like this?" he asked, curiosity in his tone. "My grandfather," I replied, my voice catching. "He just left a place he shouldn't have left alone." I didn't want to go into details, didn't want to explain that my father had just slammed the door in his face, that he'd driven 15 hours only to be cruelly rejected. I just wanted to find him, to hug him, to tell him he wasn't alone. The driver nodded as if sensing I didn't want to say more. "All right, keep your eyes peeled. If your grandpa's driving an old truck, he probably hasn't gone far. Older folks usually find somewhere warm to stop." His words sparked a tiny flicker of hope in me. I gripped my phone tightly, praying Grandpa would pull over somewhere instead of driving in his current state. We drove along the highway, past rows of houses glowing with Christmas lights, past twinkling decorated pines. But for me, there was no joy in this night. Every light, every distant note of festive music only deepened my heartache. I pictured Grandpa, his weathered face and dimmed eyes heavy with hurt, sitting alone in the truck's cabin in the freezing cold. The wooden box, the gift he'd so carefully prepared for my father, now likely just a painful reminder of rejection. After nearly an hour, I spotted a faint neon glow in the distance. A small roadside diner, its sign reading Diner 24/7 flickering through the snow. And there, in the parking lot, was Grandpa's Ford truck dusted with a thin layer of snow. My heart pounded. "Stop!" I nearly shouted, startling the driver into slamming the brakes. I paid him hurriedly, practically throwing the money into his hands, then bolted out of the car toward the diner. Inside, the warmth was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the air, mingling with soft Christmas music playing from an old radio. The diner was nearly empty, with only a few solitary customers scattered about. And then I saw him. Grandpa sitting in a quiet corner, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. The wooden box sat on the table beside him like a silent companion. He stared out the window, his face expressionless, his eyes vacant, as if lost in a world no one could reach. I approached, my feet heavy as lead. "Grandpa," I called softly, my voice trembling. He turned, and for a moment his eyes lit up when he recognized me. But that light was quickly overshadowed by a deep sadness. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" he asked, his voice low and weary, as if he'd just been through a battle. I sat across from him, tears spilling before I could stop them. "I couldn't let you be alone," I said, my voice breaking. "I saw everything. I saw what Dad said, what he did. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm so sorry for him." He shook his head, placing his weathered hand on mine. His skin was rough but warm, as if it still held the fire I'd always admired. "It's not your fault, Ethan," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I was wrong about James. I thought maybe a gift, a gesture could change things, but I was mistaken." I looked at the wooden box on the table, its intricate hand-carved patterns now seeming to carry an unspoken sorrow. "You drove 15 hours to bring it to him," I said, my voice shaking. "You put your whole heart into it. How could Dad—" I couldn't finish, my throat tightening. Grandpa sighed, staring down at his coffee. "James has his own life. I don't blame him. But I can't force him to see me the way you do." He paused, his eyes searching through memories. "When I was in Vietnam, there were days I thought I'd never make it back. But I promised your grandmother I'd live, that I'd build a family, that I'd give James a better life. I did my best. But maybe it wasn't enough." "No, Grandpa," I cut in, almost shouting. "You did more than enough. You're an amazing father, an amazing grandfather. Dad doesn't see it, but I do. I always have. He smiled, a sad but warm smile, like a flickering flame in the cold night. You've always been my pride, Ethan, he said, his voice hoarse. He slid the wooden box toward me and slowly opened its lid. Inside was the neatly folded check along with a handwritten letter. I meant to give this to your father, he said, his voice soft as a whisper. But maybe I was wrong. If you're the only one who still sees my worth, I want you to have it. I stared at the check, the staggering amount. Hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million, as he'd said, making my head spin. But to me, it wasn't just money. It was Grandpa's blood, sweat, and the years he'd endured the war's aftermath. It was his hope, his dream of a reunited family. I shook my head, tears falling onto the table. I don't want this money, Grandpa, I said. I just want you. I don't want you to feel alone anymore. He took my hand, squeezing it tightly. You've never let me feel alone, Ethan, he said, his voice trembling for the first time. But I want you to take it. Not for the money, but because I trust you'll do the right thing. You're the only one I trust. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him, my tears soaking into his old coat. In that moment, I felt like I was holding his entire world, his scars, his dreams, and the pain he'd kept hidden for years. Have dinner with me, Ethan, he said softly. A simple Christmas meal, just the two of us. We ordered food, a plate of burgers and fries, nothing fancy, but to me it was the best meal I'd ever had. We sat there in the little diner with its dim neon glow, talking like we did when I was a kid. He shared old stories about when he and Grandma were young, how she taught him to waltz in their living room, how he'd sneak her cookies and get playfully scolded. I laughed, but my heart still ached. I knew he was trying to hide his sadness, trying to give me a complete Christmas. When we left the diner, he suggested finding a nearby motel to rest. No need to rush home, he said calmly. The snow's coming down hard and I want to stay here tonight with you. I nodded, unwilling to leave his side. We found a modest motel a few blocks away with pale yellow walls and the faint smell of old wood. The room was small, just a double bed, a small table, and an ancient TV, but to me it was warmer than any 5-star hotel. In the room, Grandpa sat on the bed, placing the wooden box on the table. He opened it, took out the handwritten letter, and handed it to me. Read it, Ethan, he said. I want you to know everything. I took the letter, my hands trembling. His handwriting was strong yet meticulous, just like him. The letter was meant for Dad, but now it felt like a confession meant for me. Son, I know you have your own life, and I don't blame you for it. But I promised your mother I'd do everything to give you a better life. This money is all I can do now. It's not just money. It's the years I fought, the nights I didn't sleep, the times I thought I wouldn't make it back. I hope it helps you the way I've always hoped you'd remember me. I love you, Dad. I finished reading, tears falling onto the paper. I looked at him at a loss for words. Grandpa, I whispered, but he raised a hand to stop me. Don't say anything, Ethan, he said, his voice low. I've told you many stories about the war, but there are things I never shared. Agent Orange didn't just take my health. It took dreams, years I could have spent with family. When I learned I won the lawsuit, I thought it was a chance to fix things, but I was wrong. I knelt before him, grabbing his hands. You weren't wrong, I said, my voice shaking. You did everything you could. I'm proud of you, and I'll never let you feel worthless. He smiled, pulling me into a hug. You're my greatest gift, Ethan, he said. More than this money, more than anything. We sat there in the small room, talking late into the night. He told me about his days in Vietnam, about the comrades he lost, about how he survived just to keep his promise to Grandma. He spoke of sleepless nights haunted by pain and memories that never faded. And I shared my dreams, how I wanted to be like him, strong, steadfast, and always living for others. When morning came, we left the motel carrying the wooden box and a new resolve. I didn't know what the future held or how Dad would react when he realized what he'd turned away. But I knew one thing. I'd stand by Grandpa, no matter what. We climbed into his old truck and drove back to Willow Creek, leaving behind the brightly lit house and its cruel words. On the way, I glanced at him, seeing a faint smile on his lips. And I knew, though his heart was wounded, he was still the strongest man I'd ever known. The journey back to Willow Creek was long, but not as heavy as I'd expected. Grandpa's truck rattled over the bumpy roads, but the steady growl of the engine carried a strange sense of comfort. I sat in the passenger seat, the wooden box resting on my lap, feeling its weight. Not just the wood, not just the check inside, but the shattered hopes it held. Grandpa drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but I knew his mind was elsewhere. Every now and then, he softly hummed an old tune, one Grandma used to love. I didn't dare break the silence, just watched him quietly, my heart full of love and a lingering fear of what lay ahead. When we reached Willow Creek, the morning sun cast a pale golden glow over the town, as if trying to soothe the wounds of the previous night. Grandpa's wooden house came into view, standing sturdy amid the fields, with its weathered fence and the small garden he tended daily. I helped him carry his things inside, placing the wooden box on the dining table. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" I asked, unwilling to leave him now. He smiled, patting my shoulder. "You're always welcome, Ethan. But don't let this mess with your studies. I'm fine." I knew he was trying to be strong, but the sadness in his eyes was impossible to ignore. I nodded, but in my heart, I'd already decided. I wasn't leaving him alone, at least not for the next few days. Over the following days, I stayed at his house, helping him chop firewood, mow the lawn, and patch a few leaks on the roof. We didn't talk about Christmas Eve or Dad, but the wooden box remained on the table, a silent reminder. I tried to make him laugh, sharing trivial stories about school, like the time I botched a presentation because I was too nervous. He laughed heartily, his voice filling the house, but I knew he was still carrying an unhealed wound. Then on a chilly afternoon 3 days after Christmas, what I'd feared finally happened. I was helping Grandpa stoke the fireplace when I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window, my heart pounding, as I saw Dad's sleek Mercedes parked in the front yard. He stepped out, still in an expensive suit, but his usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of unease, as if he knew he'd done something wrong. "Grandpa," I called softly, my voice tense. "Dad's here." Grandpa stood up slowly, saying nothing. He wiped his hands on his flannel shirt and walked out to the porch. I followed, my heart racing. Dad stood there, hands in his coat pockets, his breath forming white clouds in the cold air. "Why are you here, James?" Grandpa asked. Dad cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding Grandpa's. I want to talk about Christmas Eve." He glanced at me as if wanting me to witness his apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were bringing a gift like that. I didn't want to disrupt the party. I was wrong." I stared at him, anger surging inside me. His apology sounded hollow, like a performance. I wanted to scream, to ask why he'd treated Grandpa that way, but I held back, knowing this was between them. Grandpa stood still, his gaze icy, as if seeing right through Dad's heart. "What are you sorry for, James?" Grandpa asked, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "For slamming the door in my face? Or for only coming here after hearing about the money?" Dad blinked, his face flushing. "Dad, that's not it," he said, his voice wavering. "I'm truly sorry. I want to make things right. That money, it matters for our family. I could use it to invest, to build a better future for Ethan, for all of us." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to interrupt. I knew Dad wasn't sorry for hurting Grandpa. He only regretted missing out on the money. Grandpa looked at him, his eyes no longer those of a hopeful father, but of someone who'd lost faith. "James," he said, his voice cold as ice, "you didn't lose your share. You chose it when you closed the door that night." Dad stood frozen, unable to respond. I saw him want to argue, to justify himself, but Grandpa's gaze silenced him. Grandpa turned and walked back into the house, leaving Dad standing in the snowy yard. I looked at Dad wanting to say something, but then I turned and followed Grandpa inside. The door closed behind me, and I knew that moment had drawn an uncrossable line between Dad and Grandpa. A few days later, Grandpa called a real estate agent to the house. I was stunned when I heard him say he wanted to sell the wooden house, the place where he and Grandma had lived nearly their entire lives, where I'd grown up with my fondest memories. "Grandpa, why are you selling the house?" I asked, my voice panicked. He smiled, this time a free, unburdened smile, as if he'd shed a heavy weight. "I don't need this house anymore, Ethan," he said. "It's full of memories, but I don't want to be tied to the past. I want to live the rest of my life on my own terms." I didn't understand at first, but then he shared his plan. He'd booked a world cruise, a trip he and Grandma had dreamed of when they were young. "I want to see the world one more time," he said, his eyes sparkling. "I want to stand on the deck, watch the ocean, and live my final days without regrets." I was moved, tears streaming down my cheeks. I was proud of him, of how he chose to live boldly despite everything. "I'll help you prepare," I said, my voice choking. "I want to see you off." He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You're my real family, Ethan," he said. "And I know I've placed my trust in the right person." In the weeks that followed, I helped Grandpa finalize the sale of the house. The transaction went quickly, and the money from the house combined with the settlement from the lawsuit was enough for him to pursue his dream. I drove him to the port where the cruise ship awaited, a massive vessel gleaming under the sunlight with sprawling decks and pristine white sails. Grandpa wore his old army coat, standing tall like a warrior embarking on a new journey. As he boarded the ship, I stood on the dock, waving, tears streaming down my face. He turned back, smiling, and raised his hand in a salute, the way he used to salute his comrades. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," he called out loudly, "and don't forget to write." I laughed, though my heart ached. "I'll write, Grandpa, every day," I shouted, watching the ship slowly pull away from the dock, carrying him in his dream. The massive vessel glided across the water, sunlight glinting off it like a promise of brighter days ahead. I stood there on the dock, waving until Grandpa's figure on the deck became a tiny speck fading into the sunset. I clutched the ship's ticket in my hand, not to board, but as a keepsake he'd given me. A reminder that he'd chosen to live despite everything. In the days that followed, I returned to Willow Creek, but Grandpa's wooden house now belonged to a young family who'd just moved in. I passed by, seeing children playing in the yard, their laughter echoing where my childhood memories were made. I wasn't sad, not exactly. I knew Grandpa had found his freedom, and that made me smile. But in my heart there was still an emptiness, not because he'd left, but because of what had happened between him and my father. Dad, just thinking of him stirred a mix of anger and disappointment. I couldn't forget the moment he stood in Grandpa's yard, feigning remorse only after learning about the money he'd rejected. I didn't call him, didn't text, didn't want to face him. But I knew sooner or later I'd have to confront the reality that he was my father, even after hurting the person I loved most. A week after Grandpa boarded the ship, I got a call from Mom. Her voice trembled over the phone, unlike her usual calm. "Ethan, can you come home?" she asked. "Your father, he's not okay." I frowned, my heart racing. "Not okay how, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's under a lot of stress," she said, her voice breaking. "The Christmas Eve incident, it spread. People know. His friends, his business partners. They're talking about how he treated Grandpa. He's in serious trouble." I fell silent, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to say he deserved it, that it was the price of his cruelty. But another part, one I didn't want to acknowledge, felt pity for him. The man who'd let pride and status blind him to family. "I'll come," I said, my voice flat, "but I'm not promising to forgive him." When I arrived at my parents' house in suburban Philadelphia, the atmosphere in their lavish home had changed. Gone were the extravagant parties and echoing laughter. Mom met me at the door, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. "Thank you for coming, Ethan," she said, hugging me tightly. I don't know what to do anymore. Dad was in the living room, sitting in his expensive leather armchair, but he looked 10 years older. His hair was disheveled, no longer meticulously combed, and his eyes were hollow as if he'd lost something irreplaceable. When he saw me, he stood and stepped toward me, but I raised a hand to stop him. Dad, don't, I said coldly. I'm here for Mom, not you. He froze, pain flashing across his face. Ethan, you don't understand, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean to hurt Grandpa, I was trying to save face. I didn't know he was bringing a gift like that. Save face? I snapped, my anger flaring. You slammed the door in his face, a man who drove 15 hours to give you a fortune. You call that saving face? Do you know what he's sacrificed? Do you know how much he's hurt? Dad bowed his head, silent. I saw his shoulders tremble, and for the first time in my life I saw him cry. Not loud sobs, but quiet tears streaming down his face. Mom stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Ethan, that's enough, she said, her voice soft but firm. Your father knows he was wrong, but this family needs you now. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. I knew Mom was right, but my heart wasn't ready to forgive. I need time, I said, then left the room, leaving them in heavy silence. In the days that followed, Mom told me what had happened. The story of Christmas Eve had spread beyond our family into Dad's community. One of the party guests had seen Grandpa standing silently in the snowy yard, and the story quickly circulated through whispers, social media, and posts on X. Headlines like "Real Estate Director Rejects $1 Million Gift from Aging Father" began to appear, accompanied by comments condemning Dad. Business partners started distancing themselves, and several major contracts were canceled. Dad, who'd always prided himself on his reputation, had become the center of criticism. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't feel joy either. I only felt a deep sadness, not just for Dad, but for our entire family. Mom tried to hold things together, but I could see her growing weary. My younger sister, Sarah, only 16, started avoiding Dad, spending most of her time in her room with headphones on. Our family, once a picture of perfection, was now fractured like glass hit by a stone. Meanwhile, I received postcards from Grandpa. Every week, a new one arrived from some far-off place, Greece, Italy, then Brazil. Each showed him standing on the ship's deck, wearing his army coat, his smile radiant. His handwritten notes were short but vibrant. Ethan, I just saw the Acropolis. You have to come here someday, or the Caribbean is more beautiful than I imagined. Thank you for giving me this chance. Each postcard was a balm for my heart, reminding me that Grandpa was living his dream despite everything. 6 months later, I got a call from him. His voice came through the phone, strong and full of excitement. Ethan, I've got a crazy idea, he said, laughing heartily. I want to buy a cabin on the ship, live out the rest of my life at sea. What do you think? I burst out laughing, tears rolling down my cheeks. Are you serious? I asked, though I knew he never joked about such things. Completely serious, he replied. I've seen enough of the world to know I belong here, on the ocean where no one can hurt me anymore. I didn't hesitate. I'm all for it, I said, and I'll handle everything. I'll use the money you gave me to buy that cabin and cover all your living expenses. He was silent for a moment, then said, his voice choking, You're my greatest gift, Ethan. I'm proud of you. I used the money from the check to buy a cabin on the ship for Grandpa, ensuring he had everything he needed, from living expenses to medical insurance. I didn't see the money as mine. To me, it was a way to keep my promise to him that I'd always be there for him, no matter where he was. Meanwhile, Dad's life continued to spiral. His company lost more contracts, and the whispers in the community didn't stop. Mom told me he started drinking more, often sitting alone in his office late into the night. Once he called me, his voice slurred from alcohol. Ethan, can you tell Grandpa I'm sorry? He asked, his voice breaking. I want to make things right. I stayed silent, unsure how to respond. You need to tell him that yourself, I finally said. But you have to mean it, not because of your reputation or the money. He didn't reply, and I heard him sob before he hung up. That summer, I received another postcard from Grandpa, this time from a port in Australia. He wrote, "Ethan, I've found peace. You gave me that. Live well and don't let anyone make you forget your worth. Love, Grandpa." I kept that postcard on my desk where I could see it every day. It reminded me of the greatest lesson Grandpa taught me. Family isn't just those who share your blood, but those who choose to stand by you no matter how hard it gets. Dad may have chosen status over family, but I wouldn't follow that path. I'd live like Grandpa, strong, steadfast, and always putting those I love first. I sat down and wrote a letter to Grandpa, telling him about my life, about the dreams I was chasing. I ended it with a promise. I'll live to make you proud, Grandpa. And one day I'll board that ship, stand beside you, and watch the ocean with you. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and affixed a stamp with a small ship on it, a reminder of Grandpa's dream. As I placed the letter in the mailbox outside the house, the morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a strange sense of peace over me. But deep down, I knew the story of my family, Grandpa, Dad, and me, was far from over. Some wounds never fully heal, but some lessons stay forever. Sitting on the old wooden bench in front of the house, I thought about everything that had happened. From that cold Christmas Eve when Dad slammed the door in Grandpa's face, to the postcards he sent from distant shores, every moment was etched into my mind. I realized that life isn't just about the choices we make, but how we face their consequences. Dad chose status over family, and the price he paid was loneliness, the cold distance of friends and family. Grandpa, on the other hand, chose to live true to himself, and he found peace amidst the vast ocean. I wanted to share this story, not to judge Dad, nor to boast about Grandpa, but to remind anyone reading these words that family is the most precious yet fragile thing we have. We often think time will always be there, that we can fix mistakes someday. But sometimes a closed door, a cruel word, or a moment of neglect can change everything forever. Grandpa taught me that, not through words, but through the way he lived, strong, steadfast, and always putting love above all else. I remember once as a child asking him, "How do I become a good man, Grandpa?" He looked at me, his eyes blazing, and said, "You don't need to be great or rich. Just live so you have no regrets and never hurt the people who love you." Those simple yet profound words became my guiding star. So if I could leave one message, one piece of advice for anyone, it would be this: cherish the people around you right now, today. Don't wait until you have enough money, time, or courage. A phone call, a hug, or a sincere apology can change everything. Don't let pride or busyness blind you to what truly matters. I watched my father lose his chance to mend things with Grandpa, and though he may regret it, time doesn't turn back. I also learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing pain, but about choosing to live with it. I haven't fully forgiven Dad, not because I don't want to, but because I need time to understand him, to see the man beneath the veneer of ambition. But I know one day I'll sit down with him, not to blame, but to listen. Because Grandpa taught me that family, however broken, is still where we return. In the end, I want to say that life is a journey, and sometimes it leads us to unexpected places, like Grandpa on the ocean, or me in a small room in Willow Creek writing these words. Live like my Grandpa, brave, honest, and always seeking peace wherever it may be. And if you have someone you love, tell them you love them today. Because one day you might only have postcards left, and the words left unsaid will become your greatest regret. I looked out at the field in front of the house where Grandpa once taught me to fish, where he told me stories of war and love. I smiled, pulling the postcard from Greece out of my pocket, gently tracing his handwritten words. "I'll live to make you proud," I whispered, a promise to him, to myself, and to anyone listening.